Quiet on the set, please.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
And action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign podcast. Today, we are going to dive into the life and career of someone, Steve, wouldn't you agree, seemingly personifies joy on screen and off?
Oh, he is such a wonderful, joyful, fun. Who doesn't like this guy?
Yeah. And maybe that's the secret to his longevity, because he is about to celebrate his 100th birthday on December 13th. Of course, we're talking about the one and only Dick Van Dyke, who is our December star of the month.
How can Dick Van Dyke be 100?
It can't.
I know. Well, you know, his career spans the Dick Van Dyke Show, Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and so many more. He's danced across rooftops, he's flipped over ottomans, and he shared his personal struggles with alcoholism in order to shine a light on this horrible disease at a time when that sort of thing just wasn't being talked about. Now, from his early years trying to make it in show business to that breakout moment on Broadway to becoming one of the most beloved stars on television and film, today we celebrate the legendary Mr. Dick Van Dyke.
Dick Van Dyke was born on December 13th, 1925 in West Plains, Missouri. His mother, Hazel, was a stenographer, and his father, Loren, was a minor league baseball player who played saxophone and clarinet in a jazz band during the off-season. They were living in Danville, Illinois, when they met. Dick describes his dad as a bon vivant until girlfriend Hazel informed him that she was in a family way. So they conceived Dick out of wedlock. And
Dick was conceived out of wedlock?
And he didn't learn about that until later in life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, until he
wow.
was 18.
I had no idea.
Well, because of the times, the couple moved to Missouri to have the baby to avoid any scandal. And then after a period of time, moved back to Danville, which is where Dick was actually raised. His father gave up the baseball career and took a job as a traveling salesman for the Sunshine Cookie Company.
Now, growing up in the Depression, Dick's family was very poor, like everybody else, but he said that of that time, this is a quote, "We had it better than most." 5.5 years after Dick was born, his brother Jerry came along, who would also become an actor in his own right, most famously on the sitcom Coach from 89 to 97. Now, Dick's father was transferred to Crawfordsville, Indiana, where the family lived for a year. Dick is quoted as saying that this is where he came into his own. He joined the track team and was voted the most popular boy in the freshman class, but after being diagnosed with a heart murmur, his running career was soon over.
He decided that this was a sign that he should get serious about his life. As a freshman, he had to be serious.
I know. Wow. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so he announced to his family that he wanted to become a minister. However, the fervor for religion didn't last long, although later in life he was a Sunday school teacher for years at Brentwood Presbyterian Church. And he decided in high school to join the drama club at school instead, and of course found his true calling.
Dick was elected class president, and he starred in school performances. He spent Saturdays at the movie theater, and he learned his comic timing and pratfalls by watching the comic geniuses like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Laurel and Hardy, of which Stan Laurel was actually his role model, his idol.
At the age of 16, he spotted an ad in the local newspaper for a job as a part-time announcer at the local CBS radio station WDAN. He auditioned and got the job, doing everything from playing records to reading the news to writing commercials. He loved it all. Now, with the U.S. in the throes of World War II, Dick decided to sign up for the Air Force in March of 1942. At his physical, he learned that his heart murmur was non-existent. He was in great shape, but he was rejected because he didn't weigh enough.
We should all have that problem.
Oh my gosh. If only someone would say, Nan, you don't weigh enough.
You don't weigh enough.
He came in at a whopping 135 pounds.
Wow.
And he needed to be minimum 141. So he tried 3 different times to pass the weight test. And just before his 4th try, the last time he was going to get to do it, he ate a half a dozen bananas and drank as much water as he could. He made it. Barely, but
That's
he made it.
hilarious.
He began his classroom studies for flying, but by his own admission didn't do very well, even though his IQ tested at 150. Ultimately, he never did fly a plane, although if you read his memoir, there is a very funny story where he hitches a ride with a captain in the Air Force who has a hangover and says, "You take over." And he has to fly the plane, and he has never flown a plane
And he
in
didn't know
his
how to
life.
fly.
No, he did
Wow.
not. It was very funny.
Because of his exceptional abilities to sing and dance, he was assigned to special services duties, and he was stationed in Sherman, Texas. He was hired at the base's radio station as the announcer for their daily entertainment show, Flight Time, where he met Byron Paul. Now, Byron would play a pivotal role in Dick's career, eventually becoming a cameraman at CBS, rising to the position of director, and he would eventually sign Dick to a contract at CBS. In 1945, after the war, Dick got his job back at WDAN radio station and began dating Margie Willett, a local girl he'd known for years.
He opened an advertising agency and sold radio ads for an hour-long show that he performed 5 days a week. He also joined a local amateur theater troupe. Unfortunately, the ad agency wasn't able to compete with bigger New York and Chicago agencies, and it didn't last long, and he returned to his job at the radio station. But he had an idea that television was the next big thing. So when he heard about an opening at WBBM in Chicago, he went to audition, but slept through the appointment.
Oh, Dick.
Next, he tried out at the ABC station in Indianapolis, but they said his voice wasn't folksy enough.
Well, in the summer of 1947, he crossed paths with a performer by the name of Phil Erickson. Now, lip-syncing to music was a very popular novelty at the time, and they formed this act called the Merry Mutes. The two of them headed to California. Dick and Phil satirized the most popular songs and singers of the day, Bing Crosby, Mary Martin, Spike Jones. They were a hit, and they were booked week after week at the Zephyr Room at the Chapman Park Hotel, located across the street from the famous Ambassador Hotel. Now, Phil moved his family to Los Angeles.
And Dick, who was engaged to Margie, sent for her. Dick and Margie were married on February 12, 1948, on a radio broadcast called Bride and Groom.
I had no idea they were married on the radio.
I know. So the premise of this show is that you received a free honeymoon if you told the story of your courtship. Their vows were spoken into the microphone to millions listening. It's sort of like The Bachelor.
It kind of is. It's like, yes, the Golden Bachelor gets married on ABC.
Yes, exactly.
That's funny. Well, Dick and Phil were next booked into the hottest club in Hollywood, Slapsy Maxie's. I love the name.
Yep.
But they bombed, surprisingly. The word got out at the local club scene, and it created sort of a dry spell for the team. And times were not only challenging financially, Dick and Margie were kicked out of their apartment during this time, but Margie, who had been pregnant with twins, miscarried.
Things turned around when not long after Dick and Phil got a gig in San Diego, which then led to work around the country. In 1949, Dick and Phil landed in Atlanta and found success at the Henry Grady Hotel, performing 2 shows a day, one for kids and one for adults. And then in 1950, Dick and Margie had their first son, Chris, and a little over a year later, son Barry. 1951 came along. Phil also had a family, so Dick and Phil's days of being on the road were over.
Eventually, Dick got a job as the announcer at the local CBS radio station and later as an early morning DJ. Phil and Dick also did their record act as well. A local TV station then hired Dick as their announcer, and he started a show of his own. He later moved to New Orleans, where his television show would eventually beat Arthur Godfrey's national broadcast in the ratings, which was a huge deal at the time.
Yes.
And around that time also, the family welcomed their first daughter, Stacy, in 1955.
Well, his ratings win over Godfrey got him the attention of the network in New York, where his old Air Force pal, Byron Paul, was working. Byron invited Dick to New York for an audition, and Dick was offered a 7-year contract. But he struggled to find his place at CBS. In 1956, he was put under contract as the MC of a program called Cartoon Theater, but CBS just still didn't seem to know what to do with him. After 3 years, they released him from his contract.
Now, Dick found his way as a guest star on The Phil Silvers Show, an MC'd a show produced by Gil Cates called Mother's Day, as well as a game show called Laugh Line. Now, in between these TV jobs, Dick would audition for anything he could in the theater. Aaron Rubin, a writer-producer on The Phil Silvers Show, remembered Dick and was a fan. In 1958, Aaron helped Dick get cast in Dick's Broadway debut, The Girls Against the Boys, with Bert Lahr, Nancy Walker, and Shelley Berman. The show only lasted 2 weeks, but it was enough to get Dick noticed.
Aaron Rubin then championed Dick as the perfect actor for a Broadway musical that Gower Champion was getting ready to direct, Bye Bye Birdie. After his first audition, he got the part of songwriter agent Albert Peterson alongside Cheetah Rivera, Dick Gautier, Paul Lynde, and Charles Nelson Riley.
What a great cast.
Oh my gosh. He would later win the Tony Award for Best Featured Performance, and he performed in the role for nearly a year until his next big break.
Now, Dick had long admired the work of Carl Reiner on Your Show of Shows, which ran from 1950 to 1954 with Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca. Reiner wrote and performed on the show, winning 2 Emmy Awards for Best Supporting Actor. His experience on the show served as the inspiration for a sitcom he wrote called Head of the Family.
Well, Carl cast himself in the lead role of the pilot of Rob Petrie, although Carl pronounced it Petrie.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. CBS liked the pilot, but they didn't respond to Carl as the
poor
lead.
Carl.
Yeah. So he regrouped working with Sheldon Leonard, who at that point had had huge success with the Danny Thomas Show and the Andy Griffith Show. Sheldon had actually seen Dick in The Girls Against the Boys on Broadway. He brought Carl with him to see Dick in Bye Bye Birdie, and they left the theater knowing that Dick Van Dyke was their guy.
Rosemary had already been cast in the budding TV series, and she recommended Maury Amsterdam. And after seeing many actresses, Mary Tyler Moore was cast as Laura Petrie. Dick described in his book that there was an immediate chemistry between the two of them, to the point that once the series was on the air, fans assumed that Dick and Mary were actually a married couple in real life. They shot the pilot for Head of the Family. The name, of course, would eventually be changed to The Dick Van Dyke Show. CBS fell in love with the pilot. The Van Dyke family moved to California. However, after one season on the air, CBS canceled it due to low ratings. The show was being beaten by Perry Como every week.
Well, in a little bit of good news, in 1961, the family welcomed a second daughter, Carrie Beth. Now, in the meantime, Dick had been signed to do the movie version of Bye Bye Birdie, which came out in 1963, directed by George Sidney, with Janet Leigh inexplicably replacing Cheetah Rivera.
I cannot figure that one out.
I know.
I love Janet Leigh more than life, but
I do too.
I'm sorry. You just cannot put a black wig on Janet Leigh and call her Latina.
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Different times, people.
Yeah.
And also starring Anne Margaret. Paul Lynde was actually the only cast member other than Dick Van Dyke from the original Broadway production. Well, they spent the next few months shooting the film, which would go on to be nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Music and Best Sound. Dick is quoted in his book as saying the movie was definitely not what the play was. The director had a crush on Anne Margaret.
And who could blame it?
Who could, right? Oh my gosh, what a beauty and what a talent.
Yeah.
And added an opening and closing number featuring Anne Margaret that Janet Leigh and Dick Van Dyke didn't even know about until the premiere when they saw it.
They must have been very surprised.
They must have been.
It's all about Kim McAfee now.
Exactly.
Well, in the meantime, CBS had changed its mind about the Dick Van Dyke Show. The show had found an audience during the summer, and it returned for a second season. Now, during the second season, it cracked TV's top 10, and they never looked back. The show still makes audiences laugh today with its smart writing, its warm humor, and tackling of real domestic issues with wit and empathy. The Dick Van Dyke Show has had a lasting influence on TV comedy, and it would solidify Dick's reputation not only as being a comedic actor, but as a physical comedian as well.
Now, at this point, Dick Van Dyke had a 5-picture deal with Columbia, a separate production company, and a 2-album recording deal. He would shoot films during the sitcom's hiatus, which included What a Way to Go, 1964, with Shirley MacLaine, Dean Martin, Robert Mitchum, Paul Newman, and Gene Kelly.
What a cast.
Yes, amazing cast. But Dick wasn't happy with the content of the final film, and he made a decision at that point to make films that he could see with his kids and not be uncomfortable.
Wow.
I know.
Well, before we get further into Dick Van Dyke's career and life, we are going to take a break and we are going to see what our pop quiz question of the week is.
All
Nan?
right. I know, we're switching things
We're
up
mixing
tonight.
it up for you.
Woo! Okay, in high school, Dick Van Dyke had 2 talented classmates. One was a musician, the other was an actor. Who were they?
Good question. I have no idea.
All right, well, we'll find out. We'll come back with more about Dick Van Dyke and the answer to that question after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. It's hard to think of the Dick Van Dyke Show without thinking about his TV wife, Laura Petrie. That role was played to perfection by, of course, a very young Mary Tyler Moore. She was only 24 years old, 11 years younger than Dick Van Dyke. Now, the creator and executive producer of the new show was Carl Reiner. He had 26 different women come in to read for the part. He later said that Mary Tyler Moore read just one line of the pilot, and he said, quote, Mary had a ping in her voice. He instantly knew she would be the perfect Laura Petrie. He walked over to her, put his hand on her head, and led her down the hall to the other executive producer, Sheldon Leonard's office. He excitedly told Leonard, look, I found her, all from reading just one line in the pilot script. Moore and Van Dyke had a blast working together for 5 full years, the entire run of the show. And remember, don't trip over the ottoman on your way into their living room. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everyone. We're so excited to continue our discussion about the great Dick Van Dyke, celebrating his 100th birthday. But before we do that, we wanted to give a shout out to our listener of the week. And this week it's Denise Stradling. Denise has been a wonderful supporter. She's also a wonderful audiobook narrator, if I may say. And we just want to thank you, Denise, so much for listening and for all the support.
Thanks, Denise. Well, before the break, we had mentioned that Dick Van Dyke had made the decision professionally to only appear in movies that his family could see, his kids.
Right.
Well, he found the perfect movie in his next one. And of course, I'm talking about Mary Poppins from 1964, where he played Bert, the chimney sweep, opposite the luminous Julie Andrews. Dick convinced Walt Disney to also let him play Mr. Dawes Sr., the elderly banker, but not without something in return. Walt allowed him to play the additional role on the condition that Dick donate $4,000 to the California Institute of the Arts, which of course Walt had founded 3 years earlier.
All right, but that's interesting because he was actually playing 2 roles. So shouldn't the money have gone to Dick Van Dyke?
I know, shouldn't he have been paid twice? Yeah. I don't know.
Well, for his scenes as Mr. Dawes, he was heavily made up, as you may recall, physicalizing this much older man. And he's credited in that role, and I'm not sure how this is supposed to be pronounced.
I know, right?
But basically, it reads Navkid Keed. At the end of the credits, the letters unscrambled into the name Dick Van Dyke.
How clever.
I know it. His attempt at a Cockney accent, however, in the film, has been lambasted as one of the worst accents in film history, cited by actors since then as an example of how not to sound. And Dick himself makes fun of it. But that all didn't seem to matter because the film was nominated for 13 Academy Awards. It won 5, including Best Actress for Julie Andrews and 2 for the Sherman Brothers for Best Original Song, Chim Chim Cheree, and Best Score.
Dick followed this up with the movie The Art of Love in 1965, which was directed by Norman Jewison and featured Angie Dickinson and James Garner, 2 of my favorites. Mm-hmm. The Dick Van Dyke Show continued, and an episode featuring Dick doing an impression of Stan Laurel was particularly special. Dick had befriended Stan Laurel, who was his childhood idol, and after watching the episode, Stan proceeded to give Dick 40 minutes of notes, which Dick described as the best lesson in comedy I've ever heard. When Stan Laurel passed away in 1965, Dick gave the eulogy.
Dick's next film was another Disney picture, Lieutenant Robin Crusoe, USN, 1966, with Nancy Kwan, about a Navy pilot who is marooned on an island with, get this, a headhunter's daughter and outcast tribal women.
Wow.
I've never seen it, have you?
I've never seen that one either.
Directed by Byron Paul, Dick's longtime pal and now his manager.
The Dick Van Dyke Show finally came to an end in 1966. Reportedly, the cast wanted to continue, but Carl Reiner had felt that 5 years was enough. He didn't want the show to become stale, and he wanted to end it while they were still at its peak. In total, the show would win 15 Emmys, including for Outstanding Series, Best Actress for Mary Tyler Moore, and 3 Emmys for Dick Van Dyke himself.
Dick's next project was the film Divorce American Style 1967 with Debbie Reynolds, Jason Robards, and Gene Simmons, produced and written by Norman Lear. And another Disney film followed that, Never a Dull Moment 1968 with the great Edward G. Robinson. His follow-up to that was a film that would solidify his work as an actor in family-friendly, whimsical stories. Of course, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in 1968, a film that Dick actually repeatedly turned down when they offered him the role until they kept increasing his salary. salary.
That'll do it.
This was the only children's story written by Ian Fleming. The film was produced by Cubby Broccoli of James Bond fame, but it was not a good experience for Dick. His wife had some health issues during the filming, and when Dick had to leave the set for a few days to be with her, at the encouragement of Cubby, he returned to find that he had been docked $80,000 of his salary.
Wow.
Yeah. According to Dick, the film is not nearly as good as Mary Poppins and is only saved by the Sherman Brothers score.
Now, he followed this movie up with the movie Some Kind of Nut, 1969, which was written and directed by Garson Kanin, and it starred Angie Dickinson, Zora Lampert, who we've talked about a few times on here. We love her. And also my buddy Rosemary Forsythe from that one.
Yes.
Yeah. And after that, he did The Comic in 1969, which was an homage to Dick's comedy idols, Stan Laurel and Buster Keaton. This one was directed by Carl Reiner and also written by Reiner and Aaron Rubin, who had also helped Dick early in his career. Now, around this time, he also starred in the film called Cold Turkey, and this one I just love from childhood. It's a comedy about the residents of this small town in Iowa who attempt to quit smoking for 30 days in order to receive a $25 million prize.
I love that premise.
That's some incentive right there.
Yes.
Now, besides Dick Van Dyke, the film included a who's who of comic talent, including Bob Newhart and Tom Poston, Edward Everett Horton, Vincent Gardenia, Gene Stapleton, Paul Benedict, my old buddy Gloria Leroy, who played a hooker, of course, as she always did, and the great Bernard Hughes. What a cast.
That is a great cast. Sprinkled throughout Dick's career were TV specials, of course, for CBS, including one with Mary Tyler Moore. He and his wife Margie moved to Arizona to enjoy a quieter lifestyle. Ultimately, Dick went back to television with the new Dick Van Dyke Show, 1971 to 74, created by Carl Reiner and co-starring Hope Lang and Fannie Flagg. The show was filmed originally in Arizona in order to accommodate Dick and his family. It was during this series that Dick acknowledged his addiction to alcohol.
According to his memoir, My Lucky Life in and Out of Show Business, he admitted himself to a treatment center in 1972 for alcoholism. His wife Margie also had an addiction to Librium and became sober around the same time. At the same time, CBS decided they wanted the production of the series moved back to California, so Dick was separated from his family for a while. Carl ultimately left the show during the third season because of a disagreement with CBS over a script, and Dick was done as well.
So Dick jumped back into work with the TV movie The Morning After, 1974, which was a really cutting-edge film for its time.
It was a real landmark movie, I think.
It's a story of a successful public relations man whose alcoholism threatens to ruin his life and his family. No one except those close to Dick Van Dyke knew about his real-life struggles with alcohol.
Before filming even began, he decided to tell the director, Richard Heffron, about his addiction. As a result, while filming, Heffron would lay out scenes, then tell Van Dyke, quote, "You know more about this than I do, so just do it the way you see it and the way you feel it." Just before the movie aired, Dick decided to go public with his alcoholism struggle and became one of the first entertainment figures to go public about a drinking problem. He received thousands of letters of support. Dick called his performance one of the best and most powerful pieces of acting in my career, as well as one of the most personal.
Around this time, it became clear that Margie and Dick were slowly drifting apart. Margie wanted Dick to retire. Dick was still passionate about his work and didn't want to retire. They tried a move to Coronado. At this time, Dick befriended his agent's secretary, Michelle Triola. He felt comfortable talking with her about the ups and downs of the business, and of course, she loved the entertainment industry, was a good sounding board for him. Side note, during this time, Michelle, her name may sound familiar to listeners because she was suing actor Lee Marvin for financial support after having a 6-year relationship with him. Her suit would become a landmark suit that established the legal principle in California that contracts between unmarried cohabiting partners are enforceable. So it introduced the concept of palimony into the legal system.
Boy, I remember when all of that happened.
I do too.
It was such an interesting case. It had never really been tried before. So I guess we owe it to Michelle for palimony.
Right.
Now, Dick starred in a 1-hour special for NBC in 1975 called Van Dyke and Company, which was so successful that NBC decided to add it to its fall schedule as a weekly series. Although it only lasted one season, it won the Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series. Now, during this time, Dick was spending 5 days in Los Angeles working and 2 days on Coronado. He and Michelle became intimately involved. In 1977, Dick joined the ensemble The Carol Burnett Show when Harvey Korman quit. But Dick never really felt like he clicked with the writing, and he only appeared in 11 episodes.
Having seen Dick Dick Van Dyke in the morning after, director Stanley Kramer cast him in the drama The Runner Stumbles, 1979, playing a priest accused of murdering a nun.
Not Dick.
I know, right? Well, he's quoted as saying, quote, "He offered me a role which was heavily dramatic, and I said, 'Are you crazy? I can't play this. I'm a comedian.' At that point, Stanley looked me right in the eye and said, 'I don't think you're a comedian. I think you're an actor.' I thought that if Stanley Kramer feels I have it in me to do this part, then I can't pass up this once-in-a-lifetime chance." The film also starred Kathleen Quinlan, Maureen Stapleton, Ray Bolger, and Beau Bridges.
And I've seen this movie, and he's really riveting. I mean, he pulls off the drama so beautifully in this one. Well, the issues with his marriage to Margie soon came to a head in 1981, and news broke of Dick's relationship with Michelle. Margie and Dick separated and officially divorced 3 years later after being married 36 years. Dick continued working. He guest starred on everything from Matlock to Highway to Heaven. And The Dick Van Dyke Show, which was a show in 1988, was a very short-lived sitcom for CBS with his son, Barry Van Dyke. And he had a memorable cameo as D.A. Fletcher in Warren Beatty's great film Dick Tracy from 1990.
Yes, I remember that well. But in the 1990s, a whole new generation of television viewers would come to know and love Dick in his series Diagnosis Murder.
Yes, ma'am.
1993 to 2001, 8 seasons, and also a few TV movie incarnations. Dick played Dr. Mark Sloan, who was a consultant to the police department where his son is a detective, played by his real-life son, Barry Van Dyke.
I know, and Barry was a really good actor. They had such great chemistry.
And so good looking.
Yeah, he was.
Dick followed that series with a number of Hallmark movies entitled Murder 101, again with his son Barry.
Now, in 2003, he re-teamed with Mary Tyler Moore in The Gin Game, the Pulitzer Prize-winning play made for PBS. And he continued to highlight his staying power in films with cameos in Night at the Museum, 2006, and a moving turn in the role of Mr. Dawes Jr., the son of the character he played in the original film Mary Poppins Returns, 2018.
Do you remember seeing that? I was so moved to see
me
him in that.
too.
I remember crying.
It really, really brought it home. It was such a sweet tribute to the original.
Truly was.
And Emily Blunt was really good.
Yes, she was. I love her. In terms of his children, Dick is quoted as saying, "They all turned out great, I'm happy to say. Not a horse thief in the bunch."
What a great line.
And all 4 of Dick and Margie's children made their Hollywood debuts early on in life, appearing in episodes of The Dick Van Dyke Show, Diagnosis Murder, and The New Dick Van Dyke Show. Dick joked to CNN in 1998, quote, "It's one way to get to see your grown kids. Barry's teenage sons were on, and I had my daughter Stacy on the show too. That's carrying nepotism to its ultimate."
That's great. Now, Margie Willett, his wife of 36 years, died of pancreatic cancer in 2007. Dick and Michelle were never married, but they were together from 76 until her death from lung cancer in 2009.
In 2012, at the age of 86, Dick Van Dyke married makeup artist Arlene Silver, 46 years his junior.
Get it, Dick?
They had met 6 years earlier at the SAG Awards. Dick Van Dyke has also written 5 books, including 2015's Keep Moving and other tips and truths about aging. Well, clearly at nearly 100 years of age, he knows what he's talking about.
Indeed. His impact on American entertainment, it's indelible. I mean, God, you go from the Dick Van Dyke Show to Mary Poppins to his still vibrant later years. He's really shown us his creativity and that it doesn't have an expiration date. His joy, his charm, his talent, they've just lit up every stage and screen he's ever touched.
Few stars have bridged eras the way that he has, from black and white sitcoms to Technicolor musicals to modern guest spots that still make us smile. Whether Dick Van Dyke is dancing on rooftops or cracking wise in the Petrie living room, Van Dyke embodies a timeless spirit.
He really does.
It's really rare to find a performer who resonates with really every generation the way that he does. But that's Dick Van Dyke, proof that true talent and true joy never go out of style.
Amen. And we're so happy to honor him and to have him as our star of the month for December.
Happy 100th, Dick Van Dyke.
Happy birthday, Mr. Van Dyke. And now I think it's time to find out the answer to our pop quiz question of the week, Nan.
Yes, and I'll remind you, the question was, in high school, Dick Van Dyke had 2 talented classmates, one a musician, the other an actor. Who were they?
Ooh, I don't even have a guess.
Well, they're 2 good ones. Bobby Short and Donald O'Connor.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine?
I want to be in that drama club.
I know, right? They'd be winning some competitions, that's for sure.
Exactly. That's awesome.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us this week. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywood We're on Instagram and Facebook. We're also on YouTube, so if you'd like to watch the podcast, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe.
And we'd love to hear from you, so please keep those emails coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's View.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Somebody's already making...
Wow.
Wow. Just wow. After you scolded us.
Wow, Linz.
Didn't scold you.
And
I
now
think-
look at you.
Linz, I think you need to stop,
Yeah,
take a
stop.
pause,
Come on.
Seriously?
Take a pause.
and start over.
2 words. Easter egg.
I knew it. I knew that's why you weren't stopping. Okay.
All right, go again, and this time sound like you know what you're doing.